the last Sunday of the year 2023, as I'm sure you are aware. And the message I have for us today is entitled, The Empty Blue Book, An Earworm, and Cinquenta, Moving Forward in the Spirit. The song that we just heard sung was a very famous song back in the 1960s and probably still is to this day. The author of the song, Bob Dylan, later in life became a tremendous Christian person and presented many different Christian songs, but I think this is one of his best, actually. We didn't understand it at the time, and as I've shared with you before, I had the experience of actually meeting him when I was young, playing in a rock band, and he was just starting out. And when we heard him sing, we said to ourselves, this man will never amount to anything. What a nasal voice he had, let me tell you. Yes, absolutely. But anyway, how many times, that's one of the key phrases in this word, in this song, and it's also a key phrase for today. How many times will we continue to live like we live today? You just look back, and it's always the same. We end one year, and we start another one, and we have great hopes that we will do better, we will do different. Oh, Happy New Year! Oh, great, 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 great. And then we end up doing the same old things we've always done. And eventually, a poet, a prophet, a songwriter has to ask the question, how many times, how many chances will we be given to understand the truth of life and move in the right direction as opposed to the wrong direction? It's the question really we should have on our mind every end of one year and beginning of another year. Not just to make these resolutions that last about 1 week or two at the most, but to ask the question, what do we need to do to really change from one way of life to another way of life? Not just a New Year's resolution, but a New Year revolution in which we become people of the Spirit. This is what Jesus came to tell humanity about. You cannot continue to live as human beings. You need to start living as spirit beings. As long as you continue to live as human beings, you will continue to repeat the same evil, dark, useless things that you have done in the past. There's no changing there. It will always be the same because you are continuing to be the same old human person that you have always been. So that's why every year we keep repeating these things like war and like poverty and like hate for one another and all the other evil kinds of things, the greed, all of that continues every year, maybe different forms, but it's still the same thing over and over and over again because we've not really faced the question of how we can have an inner revolution of ourselves. And I think today, because I live in this time and you live in this time, we have to say that it seems much worse to us now than it has in the past. And I think part of that is for two different reasons. First of all, I really have to say, in the Western world especially, and probably in the Eastern world as well, we have lost our belief in a higher power. We just somewhere down the road kind of gave up on the idea of a higher power. Oh, when we get in a bad shape and we have a terminal illness or horrible car wreck or something really bad, then all of a sudden we might start to believe in a higher power again. But as a rule, in our society, generally, throughout the world, whatever nation you might be in, We just don't believe in the higher power anymore. It's all about what humans can do. It's all about what the government can do or what political parties can do. It's all about what persons themselves can do. It's all about what humanity can do to create a better world. And it just hasn't happened, and it never will happen. Because we don't have the ability, and we don't have the power, and we don't have what it takes. We first need to realize that that's one of the big problems of our time, is that we have really quit believing in a higher power every day, 24 hours a day. We just don't do that anymore. People just don't believe in that anymore. They just don't pay attention to that anymore. And then the second thing, of course, is after they look at what humanity does and they look at what a mess we make of things, people nowadays have pretty much given up hope. They just kind of say, well, it's just going to be bad and it's not going to be ever good and it's just going to be sad. And they just kind of give up hope over what they see and what's going on. So when you have a world where people know, if you have a world where people no longer believe in a higher power and they no longer have any hope for a better future, what do you think this world is going to be like? Well, it's not going to be good, I can tell you that. It's not going to be nice, I can tell you that. It's going to be dark and difficult and horrible. So, we need to stop here on the end of this year 2023 and think about what we individually can do to become these new people of the Spirit and encourage others to go in that direction as well. The gospel of Jesus is what we preach, and that's what we believe is the salvation of the world. And the reason we believe that is because Jesus basically said there is a higher power. There is a God who is the main cause of everything that takes place in this reality. There is this higher power in all of the world. We're not just talking about up in heaven sitting on a throne someplace. We're talking about every aspect of reality. Anything that occurs in this world comes out of the power of God. And we have forgotten that. And Jesus preached that. And he said that power that is God, that rules this world, is a benevolent power. It's a power that loves us. It's a power that has our best interest in mind. It is a power that will change our world into the heaven on earth that it was meant to be. That's what Jesus preached. That's the gospel that he believed in. And it's the gospel we believe in. So it's a word we need to share with all the people in our community here and wherever we can, that these are the things that we do believe in. That there is this higher power, and if we ignore it, if we think it's not there, if we don't think it's important, we do so at our own risks. And that power will be victorious in the love that it has for its creation. It will not lose. It will not lose. And we must understand that. And so that everything that happens and goes on and does, that power will be victorious. Those were the two major ideas that Jesus presented to the world. So you had best understand this power, which we now call the Spirit, which we now call God, which we now call the great I Am, the source of all being. That power is absolutely as real as anything there is in this world. It's actually more real than electricity, more real than nuclear power, more real than any kind of fossil fuels we might run into. It is the ultimate power of the universe, and we had best decide we need to be sure that we humble ourselves before that power every day of our lives, because it is going to be victorious. So today, I'd like to share with you 3 things I think we can do to have a more Spirit-led life. To me, that's the whole reason why I preach to people, is to try to help them understand how to have a Spirit-led life. They don't teach this in school. They don't teach it in many churches, unfortunately. But it is possible for us to have a Spirit-led life. We just need to know what we must do. And there's 3 things that I always try to make clear to folks when I'm trying to teach what the things are that we must do to have a good Spirit-led life. And the first one is we must be honest to God. The second one is we must learn how to immerse ourselves in the things of God. And then the last one is we must learn how to be born again with a new mind, a new understanding, a new interpretation, a new vision of what the world is about. These are the three things we need to do. So let me go over each one of those right quickly. And hopefully you can take these thoughts home and work on them to have a much more Spirit-led life in the new year. First of all, the idea of being honest to God. What does that mean? What that means to me is being honest about who you are and what you can do. You know? One of the things the Apostle Paul said in such a beautiful way, he said, "Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought." Yeah. Human pride is a real big problem. Yeah, it's what gets us into every mess that we've ever gotten into. It's our pride. And that pride can really, really lead us down some dark roads. So to be honest to God is to be honest about who we are and what we can really do in this world. Because we have a real false idea about that. When I was studying for my doctorate in philosophy at the University of Texas, I had a philosophy professor that was really very good. And we were studying the classic philosophers at that time, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, and others. And we had a final exam, which many of us looked at with fear and trembling because it was the only grade that we would be given for that semester. It was an essay exam. They used to, and I guess I don't know if they still do that in college nowadays or not, but it was an essay exam. And in those days, it was a thing that everybody had. You could buy them at the bookstore. It was called a blue book. And the blue book was just an empty book. It had about 15 pages in it, and it was empty paper. And to take the exam in those days, you had to have your blue book. So you could write in there all the things you wanted to write and answer to the professor's questions. And then it would be graded, and you would have your grade for the semester. So we all had our blue books, and we were ready to go, pencil sharp or pens or whatever. And the test was handed out, and it was a simple test. We had kind of expected it. It said, write down everything you know about Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, and how their philosophies affect your life. So that's a big subject. A lot of things to write about. And I think we had 2 hours to finish. Everybody writing. And we all turned in our blue books. And when we got them back at the beginning of the next semester and our grades and so forth, most of us got a C or a D on our exams. And I was kind of disappointed because I thought I had done a very good job of talking about that. But one of our class members, and this was the eye-opening thing to me, that the professor had been trying to teach us, I think. He got an A on his exam. And I thought, wow, how did you get an A? And all the rest of us got C's and D's and things like that. And he kind of had a smirk on his face. He was a pretty intelligent guy. I don't know whatever happened to him. And he said, well, here, look at my exam. So I opened it up to look at it. And every page was blank. Every page was totally blank. And he got an A. Because the professor wanted us to finally realize that we really did not know anything about those philosophers. And we really did not know anything about how their philosophy affected our life. And that's why he turned in a blank, empty blue book. And that's really kind of what we have to do in life today. Because life always comes at us and says, what do you know about this? What do you know about this? Don't you know how to do that? Don't you know how to do that? Don't you know this is the right way? Don't you know that's the wrong way? know. Life comes at us and it tempts our pride all the time to make us think that we know something, that we can do something, that we can bring about something that will be important and useful in this world. That's what we always think about ourselves, but the truth of the matter is we cannot unless we are led by the Spirit of God. Then we can do something that's meaningful, powerful, and lasting in this world. But if we try to do it on our own knowledge and in our own way, we will certainly end up leading and being in a mess. One professor I had one time said very clearly, he said, you know, God has the greatest power because He can show creation is my work. What's yours, man? A mess. He creates creation and we make a mess. That's the difference between us and God. His ways are not our ways. And we have to get into that mentality of understanding that only as God is willing, only as God can direct us, only as God makes things clear to us, can we do anything that is lasting, meaningful, and purposeful in this world. The rest of it is, as Shakespeare said, a tempest in a teapot. It is nothing about nothing. And that's the first step to being a Spirit-led person. When you have the humility to say, I don't know nothing about nothing. I'm only here by the mercy of God. And I will only be here by the mercy of God. And if I ever do anything, it will only be because of the mercy of God. You see? If you just stop to think about this, I used to have young people and I'd ask them this question. I said, name something that you actually gave yourself, that you actually created yourself, that you actually did. And, you know, they would come up with all kinds of stuff. But you just go through that list and you point it out. None of those things did we ever do. Did you decide to be born? Did you make yourself born? No, I didn't do that. Did you give yourself your name? No, I didn't do that. Did you decide where you were going to be born, what language you were going to speak, and what kind of a world you were going to live in? Well, no, I didn't do that. Well, who did it? God did. And it's that way for the rest of your life. Nothing that you had your hands on can be traced back to the beginning of the beginnings. It all belongs to God. So that's the first thought I have today, is that we need to be honest about ourselves and understand that only by God's mercy can we do anything that is lasting, worthwhile, and beneficial to the world in which we live. Now the second thought is this idea of being immersed in the things of God. You know, that word immersion is a word that people have heard of in the Christian faith, and many have heard of it in terms of the baptism ritual, where some of the faith believes that you have to actually be immersed. It means that you have to be put totally down below water and brought back up. That's immersion. The whole body has to go into the water, and they really believe that and argue back and forth about it. But the word immersion just simply means to be engaged in. It means to be totally covered by. And so that's why I say be immersed in God, which is to say that you need to live such as if you are surrounded by God, filled with God, led by God, that God is all around you all the time, in you, in all that you do, all that you think, all that you say. You are immersed completely in the things of God. Back when we had the International Cuenca Chorale, which was the original choral group we had here in Cuenca, we had a director that was wonderful. Andrea was her name. And she used a phrase one time. I guess musicians are aware of it, but I had never been aware of this phrase, and it really stuck with me. She said, "Let this song become an earworm." I was like, what? An earworm? I didn't understand what she meant by that. And what she meant was, sing it so many times, go over it so many times, that everywhere you go, you hear this song just going on in your head, Can't get it out of your head. It's in your ear, and it's in there, and you just continue to hear it. In my ministry, I learned about that. I didn't call it an earworm back then. But we used to sing hymns all the time in the church, and we still do, of course, sing hymns. But the point of the matter was to learn the hymn. Why do we sing hymns? Does God need to hear us in our beautiful voices? I don't think so. We need to hear the hymn and all the words in the hymn. That's what we need to hear. And we need to hear that in our ear all day long. When I first started doing that, one of the songs that I just could not get out of my head was, How Great Thou Art. That's a tremendous hymn. And it just stayed in my mind for months and months. And anything that happened, anything that went on in my life, all I could do was hear that song, Oh Lord my God, how great thou art. You know. And many of the other hymns now are in my head like that. That's one small example of how you can be immersed in God. So that you spend a portion of your day either learning some hymns or memorizing some scriptures or listening to some preachers and some teachers and letting those thoughts just become part of your mind. It's like Paul says, we have the mind of Christ. How are you going to get the mind of Christ if you don't have the hymns of Christ, the scriptures of Christ, the words about Christ? If you don't have those in your head, as many hours as there are in the day, and that's what you're really thinking about all the time, then you are in the Spirit. Then you understand what the Spirit of God is about. Then you can live in the Spirit because you are filled with the things of God. You are immersed in the things of God. You know, C.S. Lewis, who was a great Christian writer, wrote a book called Screwtape Letters, and some of you may have read it. But in there he talked about there was this school for young devils to go to learn how to mess up Christians' lives. And they were talking one day at their school about what a great thing had happened. And the great thing that had happened was they had finally convinced Christians to only meet one day a week on Sunday. The other 6 belong to us, they said. You see, you've got to just be immersed in the things of God or you won't understand what it means to walk in the Spirit because you don't have that in your head. And then the last thing that I would share with you today is that we must come to that time in which we are reborn in God. And we call it being born again or being born anew. And what it really means is to be transformed, have a new mind and new eyes, to see things differently than you ever saw them before, think about things differently than you ever thought about them before, say things in a different way you ever said them before, do things in a different way you ever did them before. This is what it means to be born again. You have a new way of living, and that new way of living is like living the love of God in your life. That's what it means to be born again. You've had a change from the way you used to do things into the way you are supposed to do things. I don't know, a few years back here in Cuenca, I decided to get my Ecuadorian driver's license. And in those days, to get your driver's license, you had to go to driving school. There was no exceptions. You couldn't just turn in your license and get a new license. No, it wasn't that easy back in those days. You had to go to driving school, and that meant you had to go to a 4-week school for driving. And I'd been driving for 70 years, you know, and what am I going to learn for 4 weeks in a driving school in Spanish in Ecuador? But I had to go through it because if you didn't have the certificate, you couldn't take the test and you didn't get the driver's license. So I went through it. And it's an experience that I will never, ever forget. You know, you've seen them around town. These little, the driving school cars are about as small a car as you could ever possibly think of. It's a tiny, tiny little car. And coming from Texas, I was not used to such a small car. And the clutch, and all of them were automatic, manual. You had to drive a manual, which I did, and that wasn't a problem. But the clutch was about the size of a quarter, you see. And with my size 12 shoes, I had trouble finding the clutch for sure. But I did eventually find it, and, you know, for 4 weeks. And one of the, you know, you think you go into a class, you would have curriculum, you'd have a study, you'd have things you had to learn. And we did have a class for about 20 minutes, and most of that was drinking coffee. And then we would get in a car, and for 3 or 4 hours that day, we would drive all over this town, everywhere. And we had an instructor with us that made sure we drove like we were supposed to. And that's what we had to do for 4 weeks, to drive all around. And my instructor, I don't know if all of them were like this, but my instructor seemed to be sleepy all the time. And of course he spoke Spanish, and I didn't speak too much. I spoke a little. And every time we'd get in the car, he'd tell me, first of all, the direction to go, and then he would sit over there, and his eyes would close, and you'd think he'd probably gone to sleep. So I just kept on driving. And one time he told me to go to the Refugio, which is on the top of Tres Cruces up on the Cajas Mountain. So I drove all the way up there, windy little road in this little bitty car. I got all the way up there to the top. And the thing about him is, if you did something wrong, if you didn't do the new way of driving which he wanted you to do, not the old way of driving. You see, I drove in Texas for so many years, I drove like a Texas person. You got an open road, you go, right? You don't worry about speed limits and things like that. Who cares? You know, it's Texas and we just drive freely. And that's how I was driving. And every time I would drive, they had a rule that you never could go faster than 50 miles an hour was the most you could ever go. And that's the thing they wanted to see, if you could do that for 3 weeks and never go faster than 50 miles an hour. And every time you would go faster than 50 miles an hour, he would all of a sudden wake up and say, 50, and go back to sleep. He could feel the car was going faster than 50 miles an hour. I'd test him on it. I'd try to go 55, and he'd wake up, 50. And so we continually had to do that. But anyway, when we went up to Tres Cruces, if you know how high that is, and we turn around and come back to Cuenca, you know what that road is like. It is downhill, all the way downhill. And it's so easy and fun to drive. And so, being from Texas, you just want to let it rip, you know, let's go on down that hill. And boy, he woke up a bunch of times. 50, you know. The point of the story that I'm trying to use this for is to say that, you know, we who learn to walk in the Spirit, we have to have a whole change of mind. The way we drive in Texas in the open road and not paying much attention to the speed limit signs or anything of that nature, that has to change if you're going to get a license here in Ecuador. Now, once you got the license, I guess you can go back to driving the same way. But the point is, in order to pass the test, you got to have a change of mind. You got to have a change of view. And when you see an open road, you understand that you cannot go any faster than 50 miles an hour, even though you want to just fly down that road. And so, consequently, in our Christian life, this is what we have to understand. We need to have this change of mind about what life is all about. We're not here to please ourselves. We're here to love and help others in this world. That's why we were created. That's the purpose of our life. And that's what we should be doing every day of our life if we are going to be born again. And when we see troubles in our life, we don't run from them. We don't cry about them. We don't scream about them. We understand that that's how God makes us more like Himself than we have been before. You see, it's a whole change of view of how you live your life and what your life is all about. So, this is the idea. It's time here on the last Sunday of the year, when we're getting ready to start anew, so to speak. It's time to think about becoming a person of the Spirit. By being honest about the fact that you really don't know anything about anything and that your pride will get you into trouble every time. It's about being immersed in the things of God so that you hear the hymns, the prayers, the scriptures all day long, just going on in your head all the time. So that whatever you do the way God would want you to do it. Whatever you say it the way God wants you to say it. You are living immersed in the things of God, and that's to be in the Spirit. And then finally, of course, you understand that your human birth only puts you in a place of misery in this world. It's your spiritual birth that's the most important thing, because that's where you learn how to live as God would live, since God lives in you. Amen. Now may you go forth into the world and let next year, the new year, be your year of the Spirit. For we pray it in Christ's name. Amen.